Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Hope all is good with you and yours wherever in the world you might be today. As ever, thank you very much indeed for being here and thank you for listening. It's hugely appreciated. This is what I like to call the quiet time. It might sound poetic, a chance to stop and reflect and take stock and look at where we are as individuals, as a collective. No, I mean that there is a natural lull at the end of the season, after the Champions League final and before all the transfer stuff starts to really get going. It's a bit like when you see a roller coaster going, up the way. It's slow, and then it gets to the top, and then it goes, and everyone's screaming. That is what is going to happen at some point. But we're in the bit before the roller coaster even starts going slow up the way, which isn't great if you are a hashtag content creator or you're trying to make podcasts for people. But fear not, we do have a show for you today. There are a few bits and pieces that we can talk about. A reported departure that shouldn't be any surprise to anybody, and that might merit some discussion. There was that brilliant thread during the week which really highlighted how far the Premier League is moving away from all the other European leagues on a financial basis and what that might mean. Some transfer links with another Manchester City player apart from Gabriel Jesus and more. So we will do all that, but you might have seen earlier today, Thursday, yesterday when you're listening to this, but Lewis Ambrose did a tactical review of the season from an Arsenal perspective, obviously, and I think there are some interesting aspects to that. So I wanted to talk to him about that. We'll talk to him about those things, and we'll talk to him about the other bits and pieces I mentioned as well. So let's get on with it. Hello, Lewis.
Hello, Andrew. How are you doing? How are you enjoying not watching football?
It's pretty good, I got to tell you. I had my fill of football last season. I felt like it took me to some highs and some lows, and now I'm having some downtime, doing a lot of cooking on the barbecue, not thinking about football, that kind of stuff. What about you?
Very nice. I don't know, what have I been up to this week? It's all, I don't know, the week sort of rushed by quite quickly, actually. There's last week was obviously the Champions League final, and before that was my birthday. I had a few days off for my birthday and very quickly forgot about the end of the season. Yeah. So this week's just sort of flown by, I guess, a little bit. So yeah, not too bad. All
right. Well, belated birthday greetings to you. Hope you had a good time. Now, you did write an article for the website, as you do, and this is a tactical review of the season, which I think is quite interesting. We'll look back on a couple of the bits and pieces, but I just wanted to touch on one little bit in it, because I think if people read it, and there is, of course, a link in the show notes for people to go and do exactly that. But one of the things that you said was we can look back and as good as throw the first 3 games of the season out of the window, which I understand, but just in case anybody says, well, you can't just throw 3 games away. Those 3 games are important. That's 9 points. You're not saying that those games aren't important, but when you look at the lineups in those games, I just had a look back at the Man City game. Our defensive lineup that day was Cedric, Chambers, Holding, Kolasinac, and Tierney. And look, I know we exacerbated the problem with the Granit Xhaka sending off and what have you, but when
and by the way, with Martin Odegaard in front of them with Granit Xhaka, not Thomas Partey, not Mohamed El Neni, not even Zambi Lokonga, but Martin Odegaard played alongside Granit Xhaka in front of that back five.
And his first game of the season as well, wasn't it? After he'd just signed. So when you look back, then Callum Chambers made no Premier League appearances for Arsenal after that point. Said Kolasinac made 1 Premier League appearance, but it lasted 60 seconds. He came on at the end of the game against Leicester. Pablo Mari, who wasn't even in the team that day, he played against Chelsea, never played another Premier League game for the club. And even Nicolas Pepe, who was on the bench, he wasn't in the squad for the Man City game, but was in the squad for the previous game.
He started against Brentford and against Chelsea. Yeah.
He only had 3 starts for the rest of the season, and the last start that Pepe had in the Premier League was the 2-2 draw against Crystal Palace in October. So there was a real, this is no surprise to anybody, but there was like a huge shift in personnel after those 3 games.
Yeah, and Bernd Leno played all 3 of those games as well. And, I think probably to varying degrees, those players were useless to Arsenal or useful to Arsenal. But Bernd Leno played all 3 of those games. And as we know, obviously played 1 Premier League game, I think after that at Aston Villa between then and the end of the season. So from September until May, we're talking about. Yeah, the games, you can't throw the results out the window, I would say. When you look back at the season, they happened. We got no points, and that's the reason that we're not in the Champions League, which, I think there are mitigating circumstances with the opening game, especially in the coronavirus cases that happened and decimated an already thin team. There are lessons to be learned for the management. Specifically Edu, in his role, making sure that a team is ready, a squad is ready for the start of the season and not for the end of the transfer window.
Yeah.
Because there are 3 or 4 games that you're going to play every season before the transfer window closes, and it could be costly. You could be. We're lucky nowadays. You don't have to qualify. If you do finish 4th, you don't even have to play the qualifying games of the Champions League anymore. You go straight into the group stage. But late transfer window business a few years ago would have cost us a place in the Champions League group if we were playing a mix of a team. And as we saw this season, it leaves you bottom of the league and playing catch up. Spurs played badly in their first 3 games of the season, but got 9 points, I think, looking back. So it is costly. You can't throw the games and the results out the window. But the point of the piece, I guess, was to talk about how good are Arsenal and what does an Arsenal team look like? What did an Arsenal team look like in 2021, 22? And if you're trying to look at what Arsenal are and where Arsenal are now, looking back over the season, then I think you just have to say, well, those games aren't Arsenal. They aren't Mikel Arteta's Arsenal. They aren't representative in any way for the way that we played and the way we wanted to play and the players that played for the rest of the season. So I guess that's what I meant. Yeah. And I know you understood that, but just for anyone else, before people come at me with pitchforks for declaring those games as games that don't count. I guess it's the same, if you were to ask, I guess, Spurs fans, how good are Tottenham now? Well, they would ignore every game that they played under Nuno Espirito Santo because major things changed in the manager and the way the team play and everything after that managerial change. So I guess that's the question. The question I was trying to answer is sort of, how did Arsenal change over the course of the season and where does that leave us now? And for answering that second part of that question in particular, the 3 games don't really tell us anything.
Do they tell us that they looked at that start to the season and thought, okay, we've got business to do. Chances are we're not going to get the results against Man City and Chelsea, but you never know. But if we can beat Brentford on the opening day, that's probably an all right. It gives us a little bit of consolation. We'll wait and do our business that way. It feels like there've been some calculated risks taken and I know we all look at the end of the season and we think about the Newcastle game and we think about, where it went wrong there. And you could just as easily point to any of the other games during the season, at least towards the end of the season. The mitigation, if you want to call it that, was a squad that was running on empty, that had players out there who weren't fit properly anyway. We were missing some key individuals, whereas the first 3 games of the season feel like lack of preparation, or the club, the manager, the technical director, whatever it is, being willing to take a sort of a gamble as they did in January. They might consider them calculated risks. How people out there listening to this might think about them might vary. And ultimately, I suppose you could look back on those and say, well, they got them wrong. Yeah,
it's a mixture, isn't it? I think, I don't want to defend bad decisions, but I guess to play devil's advocate a little bit, Gabriel was injured and Thomas Partey was injured. They weren't choices that were made to not sign players early enough. So Thomas Partey was missing through injury because of a stupid tackle in a pre-season game. Don't play pre-season games against teams that we hate is my lesson from that. And I would have said that beforehand anyway. Playing Tottenham and Chelsea in pre-season, maybe you give a little bit of leeway and say it's a bit different because of the pandemic and the usual travelling didn't happen. But like, we're going to play Everton the first game of this pre-season. We could learn in 2 weeks that Everton's the first game of the new Premier League season.
Yeah.
Do you not think a couple of them players might be tempted to leave a late one in on, I don't know, Bukayo Saka or something? Of course they would.
And it's
They're
Chelsea
human.
and Orlando as well, isn't it?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, I don't understand this. I know, I'm sure it makes plenty of money.
Commercial. It's a commercial decision.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I do understand it.
Yeah.
I just don't agree with it.
No, I am with you. Yeah.
I don't understand in terms of wanting to be a sports team that wins as many games as possible, playing your rivals when you have the choice not to play them. So yeah, Everton, sod's law, we'll get Everton first game of the season. We'll be at Chelsea within a couple of weeks after that, and we're playing them both in pre-season. And it just, as a human, there's got to be that temptation to maybe go in a little bit harder than you would in a regular friendly, and the game maybe be for a bit more than fitness purposes, and get an early psychological one over, not injure someone on purpose necessarily, but get that idea in someone's head that when they come up against you in a few weeks, they're going to have a rough day. So yeah, and then if we do get those games, don't play the important players, not for an hour, like half an hour. The fitness is important. But yeah, we played Chelsea. We missed Gabriel. Anyway, we played Chelsea in pre-season and lost Thomas Partey. And then COVID hit and left us with Gabriel Martinelli, who had just got off a plane from Japan, Folarin Balogun up front, and Eddie Nketiah up front, or on the left against
Eddie,
Brentford.
Yeah.
So...
Did Eddie No, I think Eddie was injured for Brentford, wasn't he? Or did he play?
Oh right, yeah. So so Balogun started because Eddie was injured, and that meant Martinelli had to start as well. Yeah, my bad. So Martinelli started on the left. Balogun started up front. Martinelli then started up front against Chelsea because Lacazette and Aubameyang were still unavailable. So the performances were really bad, and signings like Takehiro Tomiyasu could have been made earlier. Aaron Ramsdale could have been made earlier. But I feel like it was a bit of a perfect storm at the start of the season. And I'm willing, especially now, having watched the remaining 35 games, I guess you can say, it's really, really annoying because it would have took one win in those games to make all the difference. But I think I'm willing to look back and say that most of it was bad luck.
Okay. All right. Well, look, let's not dwell on that because we've been there, done that, worn that T-shirt, and it's not a very nice T-shirt to wear. But you were looking at things from the end of last season, that sort of that discussion about whether Arsenal were better in that post Stephen's Day, Boxing Day, as you guys call it, run where the second half of the season was better. But people are saying, and understandably so, well, that doesn't offset completely the terrible run that we had in that season. But if you're looking for improvement, if you're looking for a difference in the metrics, for example, if you're looking to see are things that we're doing sustainable, was that evidenced more in this season once we got beyond those 3 games and the team and the personnel were a little more along the lines of what Mikel Arteta actually wanted?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we can all remember how miserable it was the previous season up to Christmas, up to that Boxing Day game against Chelsea when Bukayo Saka got pushed further forward and Emile Smith-Rowe came into the team, and we all know how that went. And then Arsenal played, I think, quite good football for a little while, and then continued to play quite good football, but against a bunch of really bad teams. So we all sort of ended the season, and when I wrote the same piece for the last season, the previous one, I guess the question at the end of it was, so is this Arsenal now? Are we a good team or getting towards being a good or a better team again? Is the attack better? Are we actually looking like we're more likely to score goals? Do we press higher? Do we keep the ball better? And I mean, basically, I think this season, if you look at everything, shots per game, shots conceded, how high we pressed up the pitch, how much of our possession came in the final third, that sort of thing, then you can sort of look back and say that second half of 2020-21, it wasn't an accident. We weren't winning games and it was just a lucky run of form. We've sort of been on the same run of form for a year and a half now. So that's, for me, that's that question answered. You know, there was a lot of that second half, or the first half, if you like, of 2021. There's a lot of, you know, we like to get out the league tables since Boxing Day, or the league table since Christmas, and we're a fourth place team. That's great. And then the next season rolls around and you lose the first 3 games of the season, and everyone goes, "Nah, we're still rubbish." But I think, you know, yeah, you look back now at 38 games, and really it's a run of form that's roughly good enough for fourth place. And I mean, we got quite a few points to not get fourth place. I think where would we have finished last season with our points tally? Was it fourth or third?
Right.
I think as many points as Liverpool, really, for 2021 with the points that we got in 21-22. So this is, you know, roughly, you're talking about one result, one draw at Tottenham or whatever, from finishing in the top 4. Like that's a team that's basically a top 4 team, right? We didn't finish fourth, but if you're one result away, one bounce of a ball away, then I think we can say, yeah, roll of a dice, you're pretty much a top 4 team, and you're definitely a top 4 contender. And I think that's quite refreshing to see. It's a bitter disappointment at the end of the season that it was in our own hands and it felt like it was thrown away. But now we've had a couple of weeks off, and you look back and you go, well, we played well for a lot of this season, and we played well for a lot of the half season before that. So for a year and a half now, this has been a team that looks like it belongs fourth, maybe, in the Premier League. And I think there's a lot of good to take from that. And a team that's not just scraping wins either, not quite to the extent that we were for a while under Mikel Arteta. You think of that cup run. This is a team that's... you know, without quality up front and without scoring enough goals, and we all know that, but a team that is taking more shots and creating more chances than we have for probably the 2 or 3 seasons before this one.
So does that then lead us, you know, to, is it a natural conclusion, do you think, that when you can produce what we've produced consistently with some, like, fundamentals missing from the team in periods when, you know, let's say Aubameyang wasn't really at his imperious best, when Lacazette came into the team and stayed in the team too long, despite the fact it was obvious he was just no kind of goal threat anymore, and we can, you know, the Eddie Nketiah thing we've talked about and everything else. But, like, does that give you more or less hope that when we go into next season, fingers crossed, having filled those gaps with some quality additions to the squad, that regardless of what other teams do, because I think, you know, we get to the end of a season and we think, oh, we had the chance to finish fourth. Next season is going to be much more difficult. Next season will be even harder because everyone else is going to improve. Everyone else is going to buy good players in the transfer window, and we're going to buy players and they're not, you know. And there's, I think, a tendency sometimes to is over-index the phrase du jour. You know, you over-index the quality of what some other teams do. I mean, a great example of that is the outcry, if you like, at not signing Emi Buendia last season, and everyone was invested in Arsenal bringing in this player, and he's going to go to Villa, and we're going to regret this, and he's going to set the Premier League on fire. And it didn't happen. You know, he's a good player, but we had our reasons not to go for him, and ultimately the fear that he would go to Aston Villa and make them some kind of rival for Arsenal was not borne out by what happened during the season. So I do wonder if sometimes we worry too much about what the opposition are doing, and maybe not quite, don't give quite enough focus on our own potential to improve. Like, do you think there are other teams out there who are thinking, well, you know what, like, look how close Arsenal came to top 4 without a striker, and without their first choice left back for a long time, without their best central midfielder for quite a while at the start of the season, at the end of the season. Like, if they can sort that out and add some players, they must be thinking, well, there's no reason why Arsenal couldn't compete for top 4.
I'd hope so. Like, when you explain it, it does feel ridiculous, doesn't it? That we spend all this time worrying about, oh no, this was the best chance. We'll never have a chance like that again for years. Like last summer, I think we all thought Man United would get better. Man United signed a 4-time Champions League winning centre-back. They signed the an English prodigy who just ripped up the German league for a couple of years, and then at the end they signed Cristiano Ronaldo as well. So
yeah.
I don't think anyone expected the Man United team that finished, was it second the season before, to drop to sixth and in the end be nowhere near us and nowhere near us and Spurs as we were going for fourth place, and be nowhere near Chelsea and certainly nowhere near the top two. So yeah, like, it's easy, isn't it? We see it, and we're doing the exact same thing now. Like you say, we're looking at Man United have got a new manager. Like, oh no, what if he's the one that puts everything together? Like, it's all going to take time there. Even if he does do a really good job, it's going to take time. They're still going to have to sign, I don't know, an entire midfield and a couple of defenders and probably a couple of other positions as well. So yeah, there is that element of, we've just got to hope that we do the best thing we can do. If we go and sign 3 or 4 great players, but Man United and Chelsea do the exact same thing, and then they beat us to fourth, like, everybody will say it's a disappointment, or it will be a disappointment, but everybody will say it's like scandalous or whatever that we didn't make fourth. But there's 6 or 7, if you include Newcastle, in the next couple of years, I'm sure. There are going to be 6 or 7 teams going for 4 places. It just won't be that all of them can make it. And it also probably won't be fair to say that 2 or 3 of those teams did bad work or terrible work just because they were the ones that did miss out on a given year. So I think you can turn around. You can say that it's a disappointment to not finish fourth, but it doesn't mean that Arsenal were bad or that Arsenal were terrible. And Arsenal, I mean, I guess to an extent, shot themselves in the foot. But if another team, if Chelsea didn't make it, they'd have been talking about when they didn't beat Leicester and when they capitulated at home against us. And, you know, like, everybody has games in the season where they'd point to those games and say, oh, that's the one that cost us. You know, we didn't sack the manager early enough, or we didn't sign that guy, or we did sign that guy and then he let us down. So I think, yeah, we've just got to focus and hope that we do what we can do. And I think there are 2 parts to that. I think the first bit is what you said, the positions where you look at the positions and you say, we could be getting a lot more out of that position. Up front's the really obvious one. Yeah. And the other thing is just the squad as a whole, and making sure that that one midfielder being missing for 2 months or whatever it might be, or the one left back or right back being missing for a couple of months, that it isn't costly. The guy who comes in, the drop off isn't as big as it has been. So, you know, we've got to sign players for the first 11, but also players who can compete and cover. Not cover as in backups of the very obvious, you're the first choice, you're the second choice. Because we're playing more games, we're playing in Europe, and if we're going to ask Kieran Tierney and Tomiyasu and Thomas Partey to all play 35, 40, 45, 50 games, like, they're not going to be able to do it. We've seen with 2 years of Partey and Tierney, or 3 years of Tierney, 2 years of Partey, and now a season of Tomiyasu, at least Partey and Tierney, I think we can safely say they will not stand the test of playing 45 or 50 games next season. It won't happen. Tomiyasu, maybe with a summer break, who knows? But I wouldn't run that risk. I wouldn't sit here and assume that he'll be fit to play 45 games next season. And then when the right back comes in for him, and when the left back comes in for Tierney, and whoever comes in for Partey, the difference is that we need players where the drop off in quality isn't massive and doesn't hamstring the team, leave the team as hamstrung as it has not just this season but the season before as well. Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that's maybe a discussion for another day, how we deal with those scenarios, and how do you realistically cope with, you know, a player like Kieran Tierney, who's very obviously our first choice left back, but over whom there are some question marks when it comes to reliability. So I think that might be a discussion for another day. You did point to Martin Odegaard as somebody who was key to Arsenal's football being better this season. I guess there could be a discussion about him, like what happens if you get an injury to Martin Odegaard. I know we've got Emile Smith-Rowe, who is, you know, the number 10, literally. He has that on the back of his shirt, but I think a very different kind of player to Martin Odegaard. But just to touch on what he did last season and the influence that he had on the team, as you laid out in the article. Yeah, I think it's really obvious sometimes to look at a player like Martin Odegaard, who's so smooth and silky in possession, and you see that, and that stuff's obvious. The game against Brentford in particular that felt like he'd hit some sort of groove, the dummy down the line and all of that stuff, and it looks great, and it is great. It's great to watch. All of the clips go around on Twitter, and we all get very excited, and it really gets you off the edge of your seat. But I think even more than that, he is the leader of this team when we don't have the ball. When we're behind the ball, at least, obviously, crosses coming into the box and stuff, and you're looking at Gabriel and Ben White and Tomiyasu to deal with that sort of thing. But when the ball is ahead of us, when the team's building up on the halfway line in possession and looking for a way to come forward, or if they've got the ball at their goalkeeper or their centre-backs, it really is Martin Odegaard who orchestrates, and people keep calling him sort of Mikel Arteta's manager on the pitch, if you like. I think it's really obvious to see in those moments where he'll sort of lurk behind a midfielder, and then the ball will go back to a centre-back, and you'll just see him charge at the centre-back. Like, he's just waiting for that right moment to make that run. And then I guess the difference to when we had it with, say, Alexis Sanchez is he would just go, but it wouldn't be part of an idea or a plan, and then he would just turn around exasperated. Whereas Martin Odegaard will go, but he'll be pointing at Bukayo Saka where to be while he's running, while he's chasing the centre-back and getting himself into position. Or he'll be turning around, and you see little looks over the shoulder at, is Granit Xhaka backing me up on this side? Is Thomas Partey where he should be on this side? And there's a couple of examples in the article that I used. One that I just saw during the game when we were playing Leicester, away from home way back in, I think it's October, and the ball had gone to, I think Schmeichel had the ball, and the Leicester left back was in space, and Saka had sort of pushed up to press the centre back, and Odegaard just sort of waves, like really nonchalantly waves an arm back at him. He just like flicks his hand, like, no, like, get back there, and Saka turns around, and the ball goes out there, and he intercepts it as Schmeichel's looked to play that out ball to the left back, and that gap was just too big. And Odegaard's the one, not just taking care of his own positioning, but making sure that everybody else is following it up as well. And there's another example that I used, I think, from the game against Man United, where he did the complete opposite, where he was the guy pressing in midfield, and the ball went back to the centre back, and he's running, and as he's running to the centre back, he's sort of looking again over that shoulder and flicking his hand the other way, urging Saka to get up and get on the left back before the ball goes out to him. So really, I think to make Arsenal harder to play through is one thing, but to make sure that we can win the ball high up the pitch is obviously a massive addition as well. I think when we talk specifically about not being able to come back in games when we've gone behind, I think that ability to box teams in is crucial to improving in that. I think you look at, just imagine Liverpool and City when we play against, and I know you always want to compare to those two, but who better to learn from than the two teams who dominate games best? I think Liverpool and City, whenever we've played them and it's 0-0, or maybe we've got a goal, we've had a couple of chances, and you feel like they know they need to score, it becomes impossible to get out of your own half. And I think that more than anything would solve our problem coming from behind in games. That and a new centre forward, obviously.
Well, yeah, an addition of quality, and I think what's interesting when you think about Gabriel Jesus as a potential arrival is the way that he presses from the front, and that sort of coordination with somebody like Martin Odegaard would be really fun to watch, I think. There's something
Tim Stillman said for years, that that in Brazil, and Chich, the Brazilian manager, like, Gabriel Jesus gets picked all the time up front for Brazil, and people, I remember the last World Cup, and everyone's like, oh, why is it not Fabinho? Like, Liverpool have been brilliant, and the reason always given was that Gabriel Jesus against the ball was, like, I think Guardiola's called him the best striker in the world. He likes to exaggerate, as we know, but he's so good when he's pressing and getting high and but it's all about timing. And I think there is people think sometimes that pressing's about working hard, but I think there's such an understanding of space and when to do it and when not to do it, and making sure that you don't leave a gap behind you when you do it. So that's the stuff that Odegaard's great at. And you're right, Gabriel Jesus, the way that his managers talk about him, I think would add something to that as well. And like I say, I think when you can then box teams in and you're chasing a goal, it becomes not about that one attack but waves of attacks and sustained pressure, and that's how you break teams down more often than not. Both teams that are sitting back because they're trying to hold on for a draw, and teams that are sitting back because they've got a lead against you. If you can do that, then it makes life so much easier that you keep an attack going for 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, and the ball's really in their half or their third, and they're penned in. And I think that's something that, for me, next season, you're looking for ways for Arsenal to improve. That's something I wanted to see a hell of a lot more of.
Yeah, I mean, that is, the final point that you make in the article, which is, coming from behind is a significant issue. When we go ahead, we do well. When we go behind, we don't. And I do think there's an element of psychology to it as well, but also simply quality in terms of the kind of personnel that we have on the pitch. But look, I will urge people to go and have a read of that. There's some good stuff in there. I want to move on to a really great thread that was I wrote about during the week on the blog, and I'm sure many people will have seen it, from John Burn-Murdoch of the Financial Times, and it's about the growing disparity between the Premier League and even within the Premier League itself because of the finances within the game and this sort of myth of competitiveness, if you like, that exists. I mean, do you worry that... I mean, look, let's look at it from the point of view of the transfer market, because that's the thing we're all invested in at this moment in time. Nobody gives two shits right now about who the 3 English teams are going to be in next season's Champions League finals, once one of them isn't Tottenham, of course, right? But when it comes to the transfer market, this financial gap that is growing and growing and growing between the Premier League and European leagues, it's great for players. If you're coming to the Premier League, it's fantastic because you're going to join a club, you're going to get big wages, you're going to earn big money, and it's all hunky-dory. Good for you, good for your agent, good for your management team, good for your hangers-on, good for your entourage, all of that kind of stuff. And if you're a club like Arsenal that's got 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 8 players that they want to move on this summer, it's not so good because you've got players on relatively big wages who, I guess, if they want to play, are going to have to face up to the fact that they're not going to get the same kind of wage at a European club than they are in the Premier League. So they're, aware that that's going to happen. But it makes it more difficult to sell players because potential money that would go to the fee now has to go maybe to the player to give them the transfer or, the bump in signing on fee to offset the cut in wages. So that aspect of it makes it very difficult for Arsenal this summer, and myself and James went through it on Monday on the Arsecast Extra, all the players that we have to sell. As somebody who spends a lot of time watching Borussia Dortmund, and you're well up in on the Bundesliga, it's 2012 the last time that a club apart from Bayern Munich won the Bundesliga, and that was that was Jurgen Klopp in charge of Borussia Dortmund. And were it not for Jurgen Klopp being in charge of Liverpool right now, we'd be sitting here talking about Man City winning 5, 6 in a row, whatever it is. So is this something that worries you? Is this, the stable doors are open and the horse is well and truly bolted? Is there any way of getting the horse back? Or maybe we just have to shoot the horse?
Yeah, take the horse down.
Yeah.
I think that there are ways that this could change, and that nobody in charge of anywhere will ever make an effort to make those things happen, be it FIFA or UEFA or the leagues or anyone at the clubs. I don't think there's any interest in weakening their own hand, if you like. Yeah. I mean, if you want to keep Germany as an example, Bayern Munich make a hell of a lot more from the TV money than everybody else in the league. And some of Bayern Munich's own fans have asked for that money to be split equally. And it isn't. And Bayern Munich are not in favour, for obvious reasons,
sure.
of that happening. So I saw it the other day. I think it's from the previous season, from 2020-21, so not the season that's just ended. And 20% or 19% of the international TV money coming into the Bundesliga went to Bayern Munich. Bayern Munich got 45 million euros. the bottom teams in the league. I think it was 3 promoted teams that year. It might be from 2019-20. I think it was 3 promoted teams that year, and they got about €3.5 million each from for that season from the international TV rights. How is this ever going to change so that's just one example. You have the same stuff going on with UEFA money from UEFA competitions and things like that. So how is this ever going to change if the money is divided like that? But Bayern Munich are already, like the top clubs in England. I guess it's a bit more drastic because there's one team in Germany that's dominating like that. And then Dortmund are sort of nowhere near as rich as Bayern. And then the gap between Bayern and Dortmund there's a similar gap after Dortmund, and then there's everybody else in Germany.
Right.
More or less is sort of a basic way of looking at it. So for that season, Bayern Munich got €45 million the international TV money. Dortmund got €32 million. Schalke and Leverkusen, who I think were both in Europe that year in the Champions League, have got about €25 million each. And then you're looking at 17, and then 14, and then all the way down to €3 million at the bottom of the league table. I don't think the clubs at the top, firstly, they have an enormous financial advantage over everybody as it is.
Yeah.
And then by virtue of being at the top of the league and being the teams with international audiences, being the teams that are in Europe and then go furthest in Europe as well, it just consolidates the gap, and that gap just grows and grows and grows. I mean, we just seen Frankfurt win the Europa League. 2 years ago when we played Chelsea in the Europa League final, Frankfurt made the semi-final. They lost to Chelsea. Frankfurt's record signing is like 12, 13, 14 million pounds. Like the clubs just do not have this money. And if we look beyond the top few clubs, Fiorentina are back in Europe and they're not going to sign Lucas Torreira for, the 15 million euros.
Yeah.
A clause that they had to buy him permanently on his loan. I think I saw Charles Watts towards the end of the season say he got Player of the Month for Fiorentina 3 times during the season, and they won't part with 15 million euros so that we can get rid of him.
Yeah.
So yeah, you've got England, where the poorest teams in the Premier League are richer than everyone in France and in Germany and in Italy outside of like the Champions League clubs. So, what are we left with? We're left with a situation, I guess, where you've got 2 or 3 clubs at most in all these European countries who completely financially dominate the league. And then you've got mid-table Premier League teams who can compete with most of those. And then Premier League teams who are way richer at the top than even Real Madrid and Barcelona and Bayern Munich themselves.
It is supposed to be sport. And I know we say, well, football's a business and football's entertainment, but it is supposed to be sport, and sport is supposed to be competitive. There's always going to be levels, of course. There are always going to be clubs that are richer than other clubs, and that's been borne out over the years as well. But I thought this was interesting. Sorry, go on.
No, I was just going to say to that, you talk about it being sport and stuff, and even... Well, I mean, the Premier League really kicked this off, and it became impossible to used to see teams regularly in the 70s and the 80s sort of get promoted from the second tier and compete for the title in Division 1, like straight away. And how rare was it that a team won the double? And now we've got a situation where every single year we are going to be talking about an English club going for a quadruple. And I know it's not happened yet, but it was what? About it was 2 goals away from happening,
or 1 goal,
this season. Man City with their riches, especially Newcastle, won't be far behind within the next few years, I'm sure. It used to be so mental that a team won the double, and now we're in a situation where every single season we're going to be talking about a quadruple. So it's a bit mad, and it's a massive shame, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and you know what's weird? I said this, I think I said this on the blog. I said it to James anyway on WhatsApp. It's like, maybe part of the pain of missing out on the Champions League is because, like, at least in a cup competition, there is the potential for some variance, or for something to sort of sweep you along the way. I mean, look at what Real Madrid did. Obviously, they're a huge club. They've got amazing players. But is it not the essence of cup football to win games the way they won those games and to come back from these positions where you go, well, they're done. It's over. Let's, 2 minutes to go. Man City versus Liverpool in the Champions League final. And then all of a sudden it's like, holy shit. And that I think is it sounds ridiculous given that we have never won it. But I would suggest potentially that Arsenal, if they were to get in the Champions League, have got a better chance of winning that than winning the Premier League in the near future, given what we're competing against and given what we could be competing against. When, let's say, Newcastle really start to establish themselves, given the vast amounts of money that they're going to be able to spend, it's kind of mad.
I think you might be right. You look at the Premier League now, it takes over 90 points every single season now to win the Premier League.
And 100 goals, 90 and 100 goals. That's what Mikel Arteta, he said it, didn't he, during the season? We need to score 90, 100 goals. And everyone's like, yeah, right, if we're going to do that. And look, goal scoring is a problem. But, he's absolutely right. We have to score. If we want to be even close to that, we're going to have to score 90 or 100 goals, and that's...
Which you don't have to do in the Champions League. I do think you might be right. Look at that, when the pandemic started and we finished 8th, and guess what? We beat Liverpool. We were really lucky. We were rubbish, and they made a couple of massive mistakes, and we beat Liverpool, and I think they'd won the league a few days before. So, yeah, great. There we go. That's... Oh, look, we still finished 8th. Then we played well twice. We played well against Man City. We defended. Probably not super dissimilar to the way Real Madrid just won the Champions League final in that FA Cup semi-final against Man City. We defended, we broke, and we took our chance. And, to a lesser extent, I think the final was more or less an even performance between us and Chelsea, but there were shades of it, and there's no doubt that over the course of the season, Chelsea were a much better side than us. So you're right, in a cup competition, you just need that to break for you a couple of times. In the league, well, you can't have a bad month in the Premier League and still win it anymore. We used to compete with United for the title, and it had probably low 80s would be roughly the benchmark to win the title, low to mid 80s. If you got 90 points, you were definitely walking away with the trophy. Yeah. Not anymore. Not anymore. If you get 90 points now, City will get 94, and Liverpool will get 92, and you won't even finish in the top 2. So it's very different. And I think it does lose a bit of, everyone, they marketed the Premier League on everyone can beat everyone, and now there are 2 teams that nobody can touch. I think it's a massive shame. As a football fan, it's a massive loss. And I don't get much out of these title races as watching as a neutral, where there's no jeopardy. It's like the team that's ahead at the start of March will be ahead at the end of the season because they'll just win every single game.
I mean, it's ridiculous. Liverpool got 51 points from 57 in 2022. I think they dropped 6 points in the entire calendar year and didn't win the title with 92 points, scoring 94 goals. I know there'll be people who say, well, it was Arsenal and Manchester United for a while. They were the only 2 teams in the race. But, I think what you have to look at back then is that it wasn't as artificial, maybe. I mean, I'm not saying Liverpool are pure. Clearly, they've invested a lot of money. They've spent a lot of money on players. They've generated well and everything else. So they've spent hundreds of millions, and there's no question about that. What Man City do is on a different level, and I'm not here to talk about that again. But when it was Arsenal, when it was Manchester United were rich, super rich. They were the biggest club in England. But what they spent what they had. They spent what they generated because they were super smart early on to exploit the commercial aspect of the club, which nobody else was really doing. You could get your Manchester United fucking tea cozies and all that before any other club even had T-shirts, that kind of way. And what Arsenal were was a team with an amazing manager. He put together an incredible couple of teams to compete with those, and it was on a very fundamental sporting level. It was brilliant, but it was also something that other clubs could have done. Like Liverpool were a big club at that time. They were floundering away, but it wasn't beyond the realms of possibility that Liverpool could have done what Arsenal did. I mean, they tried with Gerard Houllier, to go down that same kind of route. Whereas now, maybe Liverpool will drop away. And if they do, City will just get further ahead because of what they have and what they can do. And it feels almost impossible to try and catch that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think there's also just a professionality and a ruthlessness. And I don't blame anybody for that, but it makes the financial difference mean everything. I think it happened in England. To go back, I think it happened in Germany in 2012. And as you say, Dortmund, there was everything went wrong for Bayern Munich. They lost the Champions League final in their own stadium. They lost.
Bastards.
Bayern were used to teams winning occasional league titles, but they lost a consecutive league title to the same club, which hadn't happened for a very, very long time in Germany either. And then they lost the cup final to that same club, and they let in 5 goals, and they were humiliated. And all of that all culminating at once. I think Bayern Munich basically turned around and went, that's never happening again, and took themselves a lot more seriously. The old style scouting went out the window. This guy scored against us once, let's spend 10 million on him. This stuff that you used to see in the 80s and the 90s. That stuff went completely, and then it was smart. And
it was smart. It was look at our closest rivals. They've got some good players.
Yeah,
let's buy them.
That's also true. The ruthlessness.
Yeah.
There, but also the money. Bayern had never used their financial advantage to the extent that they could have. I think there was a moral superiority. We're not going to buy the league. And they went and, they decided midfield was the biggest problem. And they went and spent a club record at the time, 35 million on Javi Martinez to play holding midfield. And it was by far the club record on a holding midfielder. Who does that? So they turned around and they were like, this is never happening. Right, we've got the money. Right, we're just going to spend it now. And that's that. This is never happening again. And, they've gone and won 10 league titles in a row. I think England's moment, and I say England's and not a specific club because I think it happened collectively, was Leicester winning the league. And I think that was humiliating for United, for Chelsea, for City, for Liverpool, Arsenal and Tottenham as well. And clubs went and got new managers. I think Liverpool went and got Klopp, I think, just after that. I might be getting that wrong. I think Klopp had already been there for 7 or 8 months, possibly. The club's invested so much more. Guardiola arrived, and it was we are never letting that happen again. Chelsea went and got Antonio Conte and won the league. And I really think that was a watershed moment where the clubs had already had this pull and this financial advantage, but they maybe needed something to force them into being sort of the bad guy and being that completely ruthless streak. Right, how can Leicester possibly win the league? Right, well, they're obviously scouting where we aren't. They're obviously doing this or doing this. So teams develop tactically. Tottenham made a Champions League final off the back of it. Chelsea appointed Conte and won the league straight away with a back three that no one in England played a back three at the time. Guardiola arrived, and Guardiola and Klopp have just gone on to new levels in terms of English football, domestic football anyway, over the past, 6 years since then. And I think that was the moment for English football. There was no turning back after that. It was the teams with the most money also got smart instead. Before, I think it was sort of like Man United have actually been run the last few years. We've got all this money, we don't need to be smart. I think the top teams outside of Man United decided that was enough, and they weren't ever going to let a humiliation like that happen again. Unfortunately, we all want to see humiliations like that. We want to see someone just be smart and do good transfers and have maybe a crazy run of form that no one expected, and it means they're in the run-in for 4th or maybe an outside shot at the title race. Unfortunately, I just think that era is gone, and it will only, as far as I'm concerned, it will only get worse. The money that's at the top of the game, the money that goes to teams that are in the Champions League and the division of TV money and all that sort of thing, it means, sure, the clubs at the bottom of the Premier League are getting loads of money as well, but the gap between them and the rich just grows and grows and grows. That's before you even talk about the nation-state ownerships.
Well, it's quite interesting. I think that's a really interesting theory. And talking about Bayern buying from Dortmund, what was one of the first things Chelsea did was take one of Leicester's best players in N'Golo Kanté and, you know, hobble them to an extent because you might be the champions, but you're a small team and we will take what we want from you. And I think there was an interesting stat in John Burn-Murdoch's thread where he said 50 years ago, the best and worst team in the English league, in the English top tier, were separated by 30 points and 52 goals. Today, 71 points and 134 goals. And he's taken into account, obviously, the 3 points for a win scenario and everything else in that. So it just shows you that the gulf between the top and the very bottom, even in England, even if the money is relatively similar, you know, is huge. And let's not forget that the Big Six, if you want to call them the Big Six, I don't know if you can call them that anymore, we're pushing for, you know, greater representation from the international money rights because, you know, they're the star power, they're the draw, they're the ones that drive subscriptions, etc., etc. So, you know, I get it if you're looking for your club to be ruthless or whatever, but if you're looking for sport to be sporting, you know, it just goes to widen the gap. But look, I just want to finish on one thing because we've talked about transfers, and I think there might be a discussion about how if it's difficult to sell to European clubs, it should be easier to buy from them. But I feel like we're running out of time. We could maybe do that another day. But today, a story, Alexandre Lacazette is going to rejoin Lyon, it seems, 5 years after joining Arsenal for £50 million. How do you view that transfer in the cold light of day? 5 years down the line, he came for £50 million. He's leaving for nothing. Maybe going back to what Arsene Wenger said about this is what players are going to do. They're going to wind their deals down. How would you assess his time at Arsenal? I mean, to me, a likable guy, but considering the outlay and what I thought we might get from him, pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much sums it up. I wouldn't look. Personally, like you say, I think he seems like a nice guy. And also, to his favour, never down tools, worked hard. Looks like he's been a great example for the younger players this season when we've pivoted and had that really young lineup. But if you're breaking your transfer record for a striker, it needs to be a striker that's scoring a lot of goals. And I think basically that's what it comes down to for me. For the club to spend a record fee on a striker and then 5 months later spend another record fee on another striker just tells you that quite quickly they decided they hadn't done the right thing. And then in the 4.5 years since, I don't think there's been too much that would have you change your mind on that. So I don't think he's ever scored more than 15 in a Premier League season. I mean, we're talking about as well, you know, we talk about what football used to be like and the number of goals that used to be scored. And 15, 20 years ago, for a striker, maybe not playing for a top team, maybe you'd expect a few more, but 1 in 2 felt like a fair return, like a good return, a solid return for a striker. A club like Arsenal spending 50 million, record 50 million fee on a striker 5 years ago, you'd expect more than 15 league goals. I don't think he ever broke 20 in all competitions in a season. I don't think it's quite what anyone had hoped for when we did sign him, and especially after this season and the number of goals that he scored, I don't think there'll be too many people missing him or saying we definitely should have given him a new deal or anything like that. So unfortunately, it won't be one that goes down as a success.
It's one of those, wasn't it? Because he was a player that was linked to us like season after season, summer after summer, and Arsene Wenger never seemed convinced. And he was always looking for a striker. Because when you look back down the years, Arsene Wenger was always after a striker. Benzema, Higuain, Jamie Vardy. I'm sure there's another one or two that I'm forgetting who were, on the list and that we were trying hard to bring in.
Luis Suarez, obviously.
Luis Suarez, yeah, of course. So he was always on the lookout for a new striker and somebody who could get more goals into the team. And
And it cost us. I mean, he divided opinion himself, but it really pushed Olivier Giroud out the door in the end.
Yeah.
And I think now, if you look back over the last 5 years, he's contributed more to the teams that he's played for probably than Lacazette has to us. He's won, I think, an FA Cup. He's won the Champions League. He's won the Europa League, as we know.
Ugh.
He's won the World Cup, and he's just helped Milan win Serie A for the first time in a decade as well. So
Yeah.
I'm not here saying that we would have won loads of stuff with Giroud still playing up front, but I think we'd spent £50 million and we didn't get more out of Lacazette than we were getting or would have continued to get out of Giroud anyway.
I think that's it. It's like he was brought in as nominally an upgrade on Olivier Giroud, and I don't think he was.
You don't break your transfer record and then start playing a new guy up front unless you think he's going to be a lot better for the team than the guy that he's replacing.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's sort of emblematic of the muddled thinking that we had when it came to recruitment towards the end of the Arsene Wenger reign. Look, I think he's a nice guy, and I had no doubts about his professionalism. If sometimes I did worry a bit about his fitness and what have you, his ability to last. But he's going back to Lyon. Best of luck to him. And we'll see what Arsenal do, obviously, in the transfer market this summer to replace him. I think we all have a good idea of what we want to do. Whether we can do it or not, we'll have to wait and see. But look, we better leave it there for now, though. Lewis, thank you very much as always.
Cheers. Thank you, Andrew. Have a good weekend.
You too. Thank you very much indeed to Lewis. You can find him on Twitter at @LGAmbrose, @LGAmbrose, and you will find links to the article that he wrote on arseblog.com and the thread that we reference in the show notes. So check your app or just check the website. You'll find that right there. So that is just about that for this week's show. As ever, thank you very much indeed for listening. Really appreciate it. James and I will be here on Monday. Just to give you a heads up on that, though, we are recording later on Monday than usual. It'll probably be Monday afternoon / Monday evening before we can record. So bear that in mind. Forewarned is forearmed and all that kind of stuff. So we will have the Arsecast extra for you on Monday, but it will be late. We'll also have some waffle on Patreon as well if you want to join in on that. That is the podcast where James and I talk about anything and everything except Arsenal. We'll have that for Patreon subscribers next week as well. For now, though, have yourselves a great weekend. Whatever you get up to, have fun, look after yourselves, and I will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers. Bye-bye. Granda, do you remember the good old days? Oh, the good old days. Do I remember them? I remember them like they was yesterday. Let me tell you, they weren't just the good old days. They were the great old days. It was brilliant. Season after season after season, it was great. The quality was just, was off the charts. Off the charts. The things I experienced, I can't even begin to tell you what they were like. But my goodness, those were the good old days, all right. You get to the end of a podcast and you get a really good end bit. Now, all the big podcasts have bought up all the best end bits and you're left with shite like this. I don't even know why we bother going on, Jimmy. Brenda? Yeah? Can we put on Holy God FM? Oh, wish we could, but Rupert fucking Murdoch bought it, didn't he? Wanker.